It's been 20 years since the enactment of the North America Free Trade Agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It was enacted in 1994, in the first year of the administration of President Bill Clinton. It was controversial then. There was a huge debate in Congress, but it continues to be controversial, in part because as the United States negotiates trade agreements with other regions, particularly Europe and especially Asia, many people are citing NAFTA as a bad precedent to warn against concluding any new trade agreements. This is Steve Wiseman at the Peterson Institute for International Economics with Gary Hufbauer, senior fellow here at the Peterson Institute. Gary has written a policy brief that we are going to be discussing at an event at the Peterson Institute on July 15th. The brief is entitled NAFTA at 20, Misleading Charges and Positive Achievements. Gary Hufbauer, has NAFTA on balance been a positive achievement?
Yes, it has. You've captured the politics very well, but the economics is pretty straightforward. NAFTA was meant to increase three-way trade. Let's talk about U.S. and Mexico because that's where the controversy is. U.S. and Mexico trade is more than $600 billion a year larger than it would otherwise be without NAFTA. $600 billion larger in two-way trade between the U.S. and Mexico. That is an impressive achievement, and that's what it was, a trade agreement.
Now, NAFTA also had a political objective to solidify relations which have been troubled for decades with Mexico. How do you rate its accomplishment in that area?
I give it some credit. I grew up in San Diego many decades ago, and tensions were very big between the U.S. and Mexico at the time, between San Diego and Tijuana. It's a different day now. It really is different. Mexicans are not taught in school that the United States is the enemy, which they were when I was a kid. And you've seen the political liberalization in Mexico. I mean, we now have a two-party, or actually a three-party contest, a real political contest in Mexico. It's no longer a, totally state-run economy. Sure, Mexico has plenty of problems, but the relations are so much better than they were even 20 years ago.
Now, Gary, in your policy brief, you do argue that some of the positive achievements that many people claim for NAFTA were a bit overblown. For instance, a lot of experts said that NAFTA would lead to a positive trade balance between the United States and Mexico. What actually happened?
Okay, you're right. A lot of experts, and myself included, predicted that U.S. would have more exports to Mexico, a bigger increase in exports to Mexico than Mexican exports to the United States. That did not happen. The reverse happened. Mexican exports to the United States increased more than U.S. exports to Mexico. Why? First of all, why did we predict it? Well, Mexican tariffs at the time averaged 12%, or averaged 4%. So we were lowering our tariffs much less than Mexico was lowering its. But a couple of things happened in Mexico which were very dramatic. They had a big financial crisis right after NAFTA. And that, together with NAFTA, but that prompted a tremendous amount of reform in Mexico. Tremendous, in terms of all kinds of regulation, corruption, and so forth, were sharply reduced. Mexico became a much better place to do business, and that brought a lot of investment into Mexico, much more than any of us predicted, and Mexican exports increased. They're now part of the supply chain of North America, and that pulls a lot of their exports into the United States.
Right. Well, a lot of people associate trade deficits with unemployment in the United States. That is, whenever we have a trade deficit, that means fewer jobs, more unemployment in the United States. Is there an equation there?
Well, there isn't, and the general view is wrong, and it's a two-step view. The first step is that people think that agreements like NAFTA increase U.S. trade deficits, and the evidence is absolutely to the contrary. We have trade agreements with a lot of countries, and our deficits with those countries, when we take out fuel, which is really a worldwide product, is no larger, hasn't changed very much.
And we have a chart showing that you're going to be presenting at the event.
Absolutely. The other part of the discussion is the relationship between trade deficits and unemployment in the United States. And here, the popular view is just totally wrong. Trade deficits increase. Our trade deficits increase when our economy is doing very well, as it was back in 2007. When our economy is doing poorly, as it was right after the crisis, our trade deficit shrinks. So there's actually an inverse relationship between trade deficits and unemployment, quite to the contrary of common thinking.
Now, Gary, you said that Mexico is a great success story, but by some calculations, the Mexican growth rate, its per capita growth rate, has been a disappointment since NAFTA. Tell me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Many of us had hoped that Mexico would grow at 5% or so, which would mean 3% per capita income growth. That has not happened. In the 20 years since NAFTA was enacted, Mexican average per capita income growth is just about 1.4% per year. Well, I know that's where the U.S. is now, but we don't think that's great for Mexico, and Mexico doesn't think it's great for Mexico. And what we have had in Mexico are very successful firms which are tied into the international economy. They've done quite well. But a lot of Mexico is small and medium enterprises which are not tied in. Productivity there has not grown. There are problems in the economy which are linked to the drug wars, obviously. The corruption is still there. And there's still a lot of monopolies in the Mexican economy. Not as many as there were 20 years ago, but a lot. All this is retarded growth. So Mexico is not the success story that we see, for example, in Chile, to take Latin America, and certainly not that we see in Asia.
Well, Gary, thanks very much. I think you're to be commended, and I should have mentioned at the beginning that your co-authors, Kathleen Cimino and Tyler Moran, between the three of you have produced a remarkable 22, I think, page policy brief. It's one of our longest ones, and you'll be presenting it at the Institute on July 15th. And the great thing about it is that it's kind of NAFTA without tears, is what I call it. That you're acknowledging the exaggerated claims on both sides, and really giving us a clear picture of the benefits of NAFTA. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.